Hi, my name is Jackie Pucci. Welcome to the debut AgriBusiness Global Report, where we bring you interviews with executives and experts working in the agrochemical, biological, and plant health industries. Today, I'm talking with Ken Zuckerberg. He's lead analyst and senior economist with CoBank's Knowledge Exchange Division, based in Metro New York. We're going to talk about some of the biggest changes driving the agrochemical market, as well as some of the most overlooked elements and opportunities, what that means for agrochemical players, both in the US and abroad, and how you can take advantage of those opportunities. Ken, thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Wonderful to be with you today, Jackie. Thanks for having me.
Thanks. So Ken, now that we're entering this post-COVID era, what has stood out to you just most over the past 2 years, as a veteran analyst and economist in the agricultural markets?
So I think there are numerous lessons to be learned from COVID. Here are two that come to mind as key. First, there is really no ability to predict what will happen in the short and intermediate term when you have such a global event such as the COVID pandemic. For example, immediately after the lockdown started, most people had assumed that the US and the world would go into a deep recession and/or a global depression. That actually didn't happen. Governments responded with stimulus, and also, as we saw, people immediately responded to the work from home technology, and were able to continue working in many cases without too much interruption. I guess second lesson is that the world is a much riskier place than most people probably appreciated. And part of that risk comes from the standpoint of we had been operating lean manufacturing and just-in-time inventory deliveries for selling products. And when you had manufacturing shutdowns overseas, that complicated the matter for many businesses, agribusiness and others, to deliver products and goods to consumers when they wanted it. So I think if you will, what seemed to be a positive of globalization and offshoring in terms of manufacturing turned out to be really a major risk that was lingering there all along, and COVID just highlighted it.
Okay. So what are some of the most overlooked pieces too?
Well, there were various weather-related shocks that took place in the past couple of years. Obviously, climate change is getting a lot of focus, and I wouldn't say that these weather-related events are being overlooked, but I think they all have second-order effects. And probably what's being overlooked is that governments and industries still tend to be very reactive as opposed to proactive. So, for example, here in the United States, the Mississippi River carries grain from the Midwest to New Orleans to be exported into global export markets. At the same time, the Mississippi carries fertilizer and agrochemicals up to the Midwest to deliver to farmers. This summer, we had a very bad drought. We had dryness, and water levels on the Mississippi actually went down. So as the water levels went down, the width of the river also narrowed. And what we have today, I think we're probably 2 or 2.5 weeks in, we have a series of bottlenecks in both directions on the Mississippi. Therefore, grain's not getting out, and fertilizer and fuel and other products are not getting in. So this is one of those, in some ways, overlooked, or at least don't want to say ignored problems with or second-order effects of climate change. But the reality is the Mississippi River is always low this time of year. And the reality is that the climate has only gotten warmer, and the increase in drought has only increased in recent years. So when you think about the fact that this seems to happen every year, one could argue that, look, our infrastructure is outdated. and maybe we should change things a little bit. So I guess I look at this and say to myself, one thing that's overlooked is the obvious, right? If you have problems, it's not good enough to just get through the crisis and wait for the next time around. Shouldn't we try to be more resilient? And that's kind of a theme that we're talking about with our CoBank's clients, grain cooperatives, especially this year.
And you had done some work on the biodiesel sector. Did you want to talk about that just a little bit?
So the biodiesel sector is interesting with respect to what governments are doing well vis-a-vis climate change. There have been a number of efforts underway the past 2 years to help promote renewable energy sources, and the agriculture industry figures prominently in that. By way of background, ethanol is a renewable fuel, and that's been in place for many, many years. In the past 2 years, we've seen lots of different projects on the renewable diesel side. And this essentially is a product which is a second generation biodiesel fuel, which has better characteristics, more useful characteristics for the industry versus traditional biodiesel. A lot of plants, soybean crush facilities are up and running. We see government legislation being supportive of this. The recent Inflation Reduction Act of 2022 is really should have been called the Renewable Diesel Promotion Act, because it really provides a lot of concrete incentives for the U.S. to, orient itself to be more climate smart vis-a-vis fuel. And agriculture has a role to play, because soybeans figure prominently in the production of U.S. produced renewable diesel.
It sounds like another chance for companies to be proactive rather than reactive in that sense in the biodiesel. And how much opportunity is there for soybean players outside of the US in this kind of space also?
Jackie, you're right. In the recent report we did, and all our research is free on CoBank.com, so please feel free to reference that.
We'll link you.
Yeah, we need much more. We need a considerable amount more of the soybean and general oilseed feedstock. So there's definitely opportunities there for international players to help. Another part of this too is that when you think about the agrochemical players in particular, soybean weed pressure is a major problem for the soybean crop. So when you think about bringing attractive products to the U.S. farmer to increase yield, eliminating weeds with sort of agrochemical technology is demand's only going to increase, in my opinion.
Okay, great. So just getting back to the supply chain too, how best can international players take part in helping to avoid supply chain and manufacturing problems in the future?
So repeating my answer previously, what I would say, the first step is always to just recognize what's going on and to admit it, right? To not, again, whenever something bad happens, there's usually two ways to think about it: either ignore it or actually embrace it and act. So I think first it's a mindset. We have to realize that some of the supply chain problems may be permanent unless we change it. Now, related to strategies and what companies can do, the international agrochemical companies, I think there's a terrific opportunity to form coalitions with the U.S. grain cooperatives and farm supply cooperatives and ag retailers, thinking about building resilient, updating infrastructure, being more proactive about the time of year that shipments go, thinking about storage and inventory, and also, not for nothing, but utilizing commercial insurance and reinsurance programs to help mitigate the loss of business interruption. A lot of agriculture is focused on crop insurance, but there's so much risk that occurs after the crop has been taken out of the ground. So I think there's tremendous opportunity for commercial insurance solutions to be brought to bear here.
Okay, interesting. Thank you so much, Ken. I really appreciate the time. And thank you so much for joining us. And we will be back in 2 weeks from now. So thank you again.